friends, welcome to Art in the Raw, Conversations with Creative People. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce you to Devon Ludlow. He's a puppeteer, filmmaker, director, writer, composer, and the founder of Human Beast Box, which is an independent film and theater company. If this is your first time watching, I'm your host, Ann Kelly. Now, you might be wondering who I am. In a nutshell, I'm somebody that's been in love with art and music my entire life. I've now been working in the professional gallery world for about 15 years now, and I started Art in the Raw about halfway through 2020 to keep people connected and inspired. If you see value in that, consider telling like-minded friends. In the meantime, I'm excited to introduce you to Devon. Welcome, Devon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And where are you this evening?
I'm here in Santa Fe on a snowy, cold night.
You are involved in many projects from what I've gathered. You're a puppeteer, a filmmaker, director, writer, composer, and the founder of Human Beast Box, which creates some great films. I watched the 3-part series of The Love That Would Not Die last night and enjoyed that very much.
Excellent. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I think actually the first thing I watched was your holiday special with Stan. I've got to say, he's kind of already grown on me, and curious to see what sort of adventures are next.
That is funny you should say that. We were just talking about going into Stan's ancient past, his ancestors, sort of just putting him up in like Edwardian drag with a big curly wig, playing the harpsichord. So that's possible.
Little preview there. In terms of the whole puppeteer aspect of the things that you do, what is the origin of that? That's not everybody.
That's not everybody, no. There's a puppeteer in Albuquerque. He worked on The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. His name is Michael McCormick. He described it really well. It's not a profession or technique that you go into. It's more like a dark cloud descending upon you. It comes to you. The practical thing is that I went to Portland, Oregon, after graduating college, do physical theater and dance, which is what I had studied, and was living next to an anarchist commune. I was living in a clown commune, and there was a puppeteer next door to Tim Giugni, and he absorbed me, is the easiest way to say it, through a long series of auditions and workshops. So then I was part of a touring 3-person puppet company. We did found object puppetry, and we toured around Eastern Europe and little Western Europe, the US, South America, all around. And after that, I was kind of sold. I discovered more and more it's a very radical form. The guy who founded Bread and Puppet had a quote that you can find out more about puppetry from police notes than you can from theater history books.
Interesting.
So always had this very edgy feel to it, sort of intrigues, upsets, or whatever for people. And it's like a very vast playground to do all kinds of wild, provocative things.
I was checking out the website, and you had described the company as a vehicle for anarchic performances, and I love that description and vibe. So that kind of harkens back to that.
Yes, absolutely. Part of puppetry almost always invites total anarchy and chaos. There's sort of like a lot of the rules we have just fly out the window. So those performances can really get wild in a way that nothing else really can. And even when we were shooting the films, I tried to make sure that we kept that sense of things. Filmmaking can be pretty rigid at times or hierarchical. So ensuring that there was room for insanity to occur, because the puppets themselves always invite that.
And speaking of Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, growing up was my favorite movie. So I'm kind of curious, did you grow up watching those movies as well?
Oh, for sure. Those made an impression on many, many, many people. There's been a lot of discussions about that, actually. You know, America has a very weird relationship to puppets and puppetry in general. Not to digress too much, but one thing is when we traveled and toured abroad, you suddenly realized it was treated very differently. High art form or something, which is shocking to somebody from this country. But Henson and Oz and those guys did have an idea of how much they could do with it, sort of dark areas they could explore, and these sort of wild, exciting things that could happen. And even though those films all bombed commercially when they came out, they think they had a huge indelible effect on people, on the popular psyche, myself included.
The more I have these conversations, I believe that to be true. And just kind of looking at some of those movies as early influences and the type of art and things I'm interested in these days, when I really kind of break it down, I can see that connection, which I think is pretty interesting. So while the whole puppeteer thing, maybe to some people, maybe feels like a fringe type of thing, maybe it's not, just in that there's aspects of it that might be part of our childhood growing up that stuck with us.
Yeah, culturally, I agree with you. I mean, one of the problems for it in this country is that it's like inherently anti-commercial in a lot of ways. The Muppets are an exception, but for the most part, it's not something you can make a big buck off of. So people have a hard time knowing how to interpret it. So it's very fringe and wild. That means it's also the place where people are the most free to explore. So if you ever have a chance, like to go to the Chicago Puppet Festival or see any of these shows, you'll almost certainly see something that you never would have expected. A lot of the shows we did, also when I lived in New York, I performed with troops there, especially a group called Jollyship the Whizbang, the pirate puppet rock troupe. We were always performing in the circuit with drag troops and surreal comedians and burlesque performers and clowns. That was the grouping we always got put in. The people on the fringes or on the the very end of the tentacle of the culture, which is definitely my favorite place to be.
Going back a little bit, as I understand it, you grew up in Santa Fe, left, traveled to other parts of the world for a bit. You were in New York. Dancing was kind of one of the first creative expressions that is noted, and it's kind of merged into a variety of different creative expressions. So do you feel like that's related in a specific way that you're conscious of?
Dance has always been a really important part of grounding yourself physically. If you sort of ground yourself physically, everything else has an opportunity anyway to line up. So even in writing, if you can get yourself to that place, it naturally tranquilizes anxieties or worries or self-doubts. This isn't easy. I have a very hard time doing this myself, but it's sort of like a foundational element so that any kind of creative work can flow a lot easier from that. Mm-hmm. Puppetry, it's that's the best training I've ever encountered for puppeteers. Actors in general takes a lot longer for them to adapt to puppetry. It depends on the person, of course, but sometimes they want to have the attention on themselves or something, or their face or their voice. Dancers, it's their body. They know how to move energy or express it to the ends of their limbs and beyond. You need to be comfortable with that to start working with some of the creatures or the ideas of the creatures. I think I first saw that with something called bunraku puppetry, where they do a lot of bunraku style puppetry, very popular now. Originally as a form from Japan, with totally visible puppeteers who are each operating a different part of the creature. So it's a very conscious erasure of the operator or puppeteer during the performance. Part of that happens when you are able to mentally make yourself flow into the object or the totem, the puppet. And when that happens, you vanish and the creature or the object comes to life in this special way, amazing way. And dancers seem to have an easier time with that to start with. I mean, anybody can come along, but that's the best training I've run into. In some ways, you enter a certain kind of really flow state where you're just a vessel for whatever's moving through you or happening, which is some of the best stuff, most fun experiences.
I would love to see that
someday when we enter the post-pandemic era.
So the company, it's about 9 years in now, is that right?
2015 and 16 really is when we started doing a lot of stuff, but I was playing with things and doing performances before then, so I can't really even say when it began. It was me doing things slowly and that gradually accumulating.
I was going to say, I think I might have found that number online somewhere.
It's probable that I put that number down there because it's probably true. But I always sort of think about it from the first film, the first episode, which we shot in our garage with 5 people. There was 5 of us, 7 with friends who helped out. And we shot that on an iPhone. By the time we got to the 3rd episode, we had all this equipment and I had 42 people on the crew, just people who had seen each episode and wanted to take part and join in and help. As much as possible, we made it a very collaborative piece.
That's amazing. So, I mean, you go to the website and there's a list of people who are involved, and but you play a lot of different roles in the production, from writing and directing and some of the music and making some of the puppets. So it's this kind of amazing collaboration where you get to participate in different avenues of the arts that you're involved in. So I think that's really cool to kind of have this one kind of hub to be able to put all of that together.
Yes, it is. That's part of the attraction, to jump into all those, put on all those different hats along the way. Film production can either be really specialized, where you just do the one thing and nothing else, or you have to be able to multitask wildly. I tend to enjoy the multitasking part a lot. Switching from role to the next is just like a wonderful challenge that I really enjoy. Don't always succeed, but I always enjoy it.
Over time, you said your team has grown as potential fans, as it kind of sounded like. Maybe said, we want to participate. Other people you knew.
Combination. Some people who'd seen the work were like, hey, can I come play? And we were like, always. Mm-hmm. Other people who might have seen our sets or creatures and got inspired. And other people who I'd wanted to work with for a while and tracked them down, trying to draw them into the orbit one way or another.
In terms of the 3-part movie, one of the things I thought was really interesting is that you'd mentioned that the first part you actually did film with iPhones. And not only that, but you were living in a house that was basically solar powered at that time. In terms of different types of technology between part 1, 2, and 3 of the movie, the technology you're using and the resources that you've had have changed drastically, yet they still feel very cohesive.
That's the best compliment, because they really changed. And when we started, it was iPhone, and we were trying to use a little bit of green screen, whatever digital technology we could. Mm-hmm. By the end, or even by the second episode, I had decided to throw it all out. Obviously, you can't throw out all digital technology at this point. That would be insane. You're shooting on digital, you're editing on digital. That's just how it is. But in terms of the production, what's in camera, we made a conscious decision to do everything in camera, if possible. So all the backgrounds are painted and all the special effects are happening as you see them. The layers and layers and layers of backgrounds are coming from a lot of tricks and techniques that I researched, or we rediscovered, or reinvented if we had to, so that none of it was digital add-on. And that created, partly was a cohesiveness, partly was this really fun challenge to try and figure out how we were going to make it, an entire rabbit city with thousands of cages when we only have 4, without using any compositing or digital imagery of any kind. And partly it was, it's a philosophical choice. I think that digital and CGI robs so much of life from anything you're shooting for a whole slew of reasons. It's really useful technology, but for this, that we wanted that handmade punk rock aesthetic, feeling like if you just, it came out of the garbage, which it all did. Everything in all those shots, we pulled out of dumpsters. So I wanted to just keep that through line throughout the whole process.
That's very cool. There's this whole recycled element to it. And the fact that the original location was a place where you were using solar power, kind of running this whole production. That's not quite candlelight, but
we did shoot a scene by candlelight in there. Like Stan's sad song where he's, morosely thinking about his ex-girlfriend that he turned into a zombie. That's all actual candlelight. Boom. In the solar panel in that house, it is like a whole other ridiculous story, but we did knock the power out many times and just had to go do something else for the rest of the night because we had no more power. And that was the fog machine. Word to the wise, if you're ever shooting, fog machine just as much as you can, because it'll drain your batteries.
Fog machine and solar power, not necessarily super compatible.
My sacrifices lead the way for others.
For those that haven't seen the 3-part movie, how would you describe it?
Best way is just a punk puppet musical, episodic series starring Stan. The whole thing is a mockery of apocalypse mania, which I was certain would have been baited by now, but it's even more. Every every film seems to be an apocalypse. And so it was a mockery of that and a lot of other things. I mean, everything we could mock, we did. So it was sort of like a throw it all in there. And it was songs first. So I wrote all the songs and then tried to tie it together with a narrative. But it also grew as it went. We just did the first episode as a standalone, and then people loved it. So we did another, and they loved that. So we did another. So big tech, futurists, zombie films, apocalypse films. There's everything I could possibly make fun of. We tried to.
A lot of things were very, very current.
Actually re-editing it a little bit right now, putting all the credits in the end and doing some cards and stuff. Pains me that a lot of that is still current. Vaccines and plagues and big farmer guys wanting to live forever is all absolutely still like. I just wish it weren't current. I wish it weren't. But that it is. So
you've had the opportunity to show some of the films at film festivals as well as locally in Santa Fe at George R.R. Martin's theater here. In terms of finding the film festivals and all of those opportunities, how did you go about that?
This has been the weirdest time. We finished the third episode and I pushed it together as one feature in January of 2020. And so started submitting to festivals in February and March. Nobody was having any film festivals. They're just now starting to happen again. So most of the places we submitted to, which is through some online sites, were like, sorry, we're not having a festival. But the few places that decided to go full digital, shockingly, about a year ago, just at this time, awards started showing up, which I did not expect, since I did not expect any festivals to be happening. Seattle Film Festival and the LA International Horror Film Festival. They created a new award category for us, several other places, but it was like a wonderful, wonderful shock. Even though the festival was canceled, we still won something. Like, hey, Seattle International Film Festival, you won this thing. We don't have an actual festival this year, like you can't come here, right. But here's a prize.
Judges watched it from home and whatnot and made some decisions.
Even crazier because those films, I meant them to be like sort of a Rocky Horror experience with the crowd, everybody screaming at the ridiculousness of watching these like stick figures, splatter blood, just like a fun, wild midnight movie. And for people watching at home alone on their computer to also enjoy it was a shock to me. We have also tried to show it in the kind of venues that match its whole spirit. So, we've shown it in empty swimming pools and in like rock clubs on the walls. I did a residency in Boise and they showed it on the side of a giant moving van they painted white and through blizzard and everybody was in their cars. And they had like little snack packs of eyeballs. Hit their brakes when there was blood and they would honk when Stan said positive thinking. And that was a dream come true.
That's amazing.
Those films that's where they thrive the best, is with a wild venue.
Maybe the Motorama drive-in.
I would love to do the Motorama drive-in, but yeah, it would be fun to re-release the Kraken, so to speak, to see how it does again now that COVID is maybe over. I don't know if it's over. I don't know what's going on. Nobody does, but
nobody knows. It's maybe just what it is now.
I don't know if this has happened to other people you've interviewed, but it's like a major static disruption sunspot for a lot of creative people. They sort of don't know what to do or how to be. And you're asking me about how we show these films and film festivals, and that's a kind of perfect example of how the normal chain of events got totally disrupted for us.
Kind of like, how do we do it now? How do we do it before? How are we doing it now?
Is it relevant? Will anybody care about this anymore? Is this the way it's supposed to be? I was voicing those doubts, and my partner was like, puppets are always going to be dangerous. So keep on going. I was like, okay, that's good. I like that advice. Stan did a bunch of streaming stuff during the pandemic, which was all right, was pretty good. It seemed to be like apt that he was this character who lives alone in his little cabin of solitude, drinking a lot and worrying about viruses. It seemed to fit the times.
Just kind of jumping off the zombie apocalypse kind of thing and then going into 2020 and the pandemic.
Yeah, it's like, again, it's sort of, it's both wonderful and painful because, I wrote that in 2015.
Right.
And for it to still be sort of super relevant and feel transgressive 7 years later is shocking to me.
Right, even more so. Yeah, you had the episodes where he had advice for people.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. How to keep your friends away.
Yeah, the whole surviving thing became a different type of story, but kind of a connected story. I guess in terms of different artists I've talked to, it's been kind of a variety of things, from people who are thriving in this because they're just happy to be in the studio, and that's the whole desire, from people who are frustrated because maybe they're musicians and they want to go play shows, or even artists that just want to frame shows and hang them. So it's been kind of a little bit of everything within that. But I'd say the main thing is, yeah, how are we doing it now? And if I'm following the timeline correctly, it seems like even though with everything that's going on, you managed to get a residency even with the pandemic. Was that Vital Spaces?
The lockdown year was like one of my favorite years of all time so far, because I had a Vital Spaces residency, and then I went to another kind of residency in upstate New York and did a short film with some stop motion with a friend. Then did another residency in Boise, and then another one in Portland. It was like one after another. And the part that was the most wonderful for me was that I didn't have to really interact with anybody. I could just be in my own space, as isolated as I could be. So to sort of bring it back around, in a lot of those spaces are times like I returned to a lot of dance work or movement work to ground myself in the midst of all the disruption and uncertainty and the daily trauma we were all experiencing, collectively. It was critical to be able to kind of return to my body. Yeah, the whole year I was going from one place to another, doing that kind of work. I don't know what I would have done if I didn't do that. Because like I say, we had a momentum and trajectory that all got disrupted by this global event.
You found things to do.
Yes, yeah.
Were in line with what you were doing before.
In one way or another. It's all part of a long conversation you're sort of having. You do one thing, and then in reaction, you do another form, and then you react to that, and you react to that. It builds and builds. So it's looked at that way. You really can't take a wrong next step as long as you're doing something.
So maybe it's just a different course that it's taken.
Yeah, I can't wait to start shooting again and have a crew around again and show new pieces and show this piece again in a new form. It's so fulfilling to make these wild little movies.
You also got one of those 516 art grants as well.
That was edifying too. I don't mean to say like, oh yeah, like I forgot. It's just that year 2020 is so dense. It feels like that was 632 years ago. Like, oh, right. Yes, back in the ancient world. I mean, it was so weird because everything got shut down, and then all this sort of like grants and residencies and recognition came through. So it was this weird like stop-start kind of feeling. So I'm looking forward to doing more smoothly in the future. But yeah, 516 supporter. Vital Spaces has been amazing. A big supporter of us, of our work as well.
No, it's great to have those resources around us. I feel like a lot of people out there maybe don't even really quite know how to reach out to resources such as those. Do you have any advice?
I wish I had better advice. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for 20 plus years, 25 years almost. And it's never gotten easier. At one point I ran one of those organizations. I was managing director, but I was managing director at Wise Fool, New Mexico. We were getting applications, and we were also applying for grants all the time. And it's a specialized language. I think that world is changing. I hope it is. It's not as user-friendly as it should be or could be. The best advice is just to start looking and not give up. Like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? There's so many programs and so many people who do want to support artists. Once you sort of start the research, you'll be surprised at how many resources you find. Residencies and grants and all kinds of things like that. All kinds of support. Persistence furthers.
Get out there and find them and cross the T's and dot the I's. Or maybe do it the other way around, and that will be more interesting.
Cross the I's and dot the T's. Amen. I guess you get to the same result. There's a zillion, and they're around the world. So whatever it is you're interested in, keep applying. Also, you'll usually get rejected until your third time. That's sort of the rule of thumb. People who get accepted to something or get a grant the first time, that's unusual, and it's awesome when it happens. But a good rule of thumb is, that they'll reject you twice before they take you seriously. I teach a lot of students and the mentees and things. It's always just keep creating, one way or another.
In your holiday special, it seemed like perhaps Stan had some opinions on NFTs, which I really, really enjoyed. I kind of love the way that was addressed. And I was kind of curious, based upon Stan's opinion on NFTs, if you had current opinions on the non-fungible tokens. I believe Stan had non-fungible Stan.
NSFWTs, what it was, fungi WT, something like that. It's just this overheated world. I immediately want to mock salespeople, which is mostly what we're surrounded with. So when people are like, "Oh my, this is the thing of the future. You've just got to have this thing," break out a creature to analyze the situation. So who knows? But I really like the idea of Stan giving out empty boxes as like the presents for the year. And saying those are NFTs. Like, you should be really grateful. So let's see how they go.
I love the scene where he threw a box of his personal non-fungible tokens into that mailbox, and the little flag thing fell off.
Unplanned. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that unplanned? I wondered.
Unplanned. Yeah, my neighbor was like, "What is that? What happened to the mailbox?" I was like, "Nothing to see here, sir.
We're making art."
That's right. Like I said, chaos and anarchy everywhere we go. And if it's not happening, it's not real.
Love that. So we talked a little bit about other puppeteering or puppets that may have influenced you. Are there other movies over the years that you feel like are implanted into your subconscious that might influence things you're doing today?
Yeah, I've been very saturated in film and cinema for a long time. So there's a long list of amazing filmmakers who I'm interested in. And I think if we want to sort of get serious about it a little, one thing I wanted to do with these crazy anarchic puppet films was apply some different sources or inspirations to puppets. So instead of it being sort of fun vaudeville, which is the background, like for Henson, for example, applying David Lynch filters to things, or French New Wave filters to things, or Jackie Chan filters to things, and see what came out on the other side. Those end credit scenes, those are Jackie Chan inspired. There's a million parts. Stan, adoring his car, that's a Scorpio Rising reference. There's a lot of things like that in there. So stealing often, frequently, whenever I can, and then playing from there.
I was actually thinking maybe at some point there would be a martial arts scene that would break out. I guess mostly with the rabbits. The test rabbits were really pissed off. I was almost expecting one of them to become a professional martial artist. But I guess that's my own creative mind watching what you've created and then
the ideal
adding to it.
That's the best compliments we've ever gotten about this are when people want to immediately go out and make their own piece or film or spin-off or something like that. It's also funny you say that, because that was in my mind too. Like, I've always wanted to do those scenes. Time constraints have been the biggest problem. Doing those scenes takes a ton of work and rehearsal, and especially with something as like the kind of puppets we've chosen to use. Not easy at all. Could have
a little harder for kung fu fighting, maybe.
For almost everything. Like, they've got fixed faces and a very limited kind of motion, so you have to adapt in certain ways. But yes, the dream, that's part of the dreams in the future, down the road. The closest we got was the hallway scene with all the blood splattering on the walls.
And I have to say, I love how you used the shadows to be part of that. So you didn't actually see the characters killing or fighting everybody. It was just like the shadows and then the blood and everything. So people watching are going to have to go watch this.
Very fun. The room was just filled with blood after that. It was the best. fake blood. Yes.
Of course. But I could see how you were kind of saying how your crew has grown as people were like, oh, I want to play too. I think that's great when people who are watching all of a sudden start having their own ideas. It spurs the imagination.
They look at our movies and they're like, wow, if they did that, I could do anything. I'm
going to leave that up to you guys. We'll look forward to seeing what is coming next.
Yeah, we'll see. Things are in the works.
Or something I've become curious about is time travel. That's something I think I started thinking about originally when traveling was really difficult. And so it was like, okay, where would you travel? But then it was like, well, why not just time travel? Because it seemed like just as radical as a concept. And we're traveling again. If you could time travel into the past or into the future.
The time travel game. Well, there's like 10,000 places to choose from.
You can only pick two.
In this thought experiment, if there's only two, one is definitely the future, because I'm absolutely curious. By the way, I think people are going to be more and more interested in time travel as things get more and more chaotic and desperate in the world. We'll be like, oh, for the old days. I'm also very interested in like the late 1700s period. Sort of there's this like wild set of changes and ideas percolating and happening. There's also this great abundance of nature. I'm kind of like a nature loving nut. So being able to go into these places in their much more pristine state was always an attractive idea for me. But then to be able to come back and, talk about inventing electricity or something was always fun. Very boring answer, but also accurate.
So both sides, you want to go see it pre-electricity and then what's happening in the future.
Where did we go wrong? Where didn't we go wrong?
Before we started talking, you were letting your beast, aka your dog, in or out. I have two dogs sitting under my table. Safe to say I'm a dog fan. So Stan's dog from your films, he's like a puppet sock dog.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
I just love him.
Sock dog is like number one favorite after the films. Everybody loves that character the most. Strangely, we made that character before we got this dog, and this dog seems to have an almost identical personality to Sock Dog, which is surreal. But there it is. I could only allow one sock puppet into the film because sock puppets are true insanity. If you allow yourself to start doing it with some friends, you're going to go crazy. Crazy things will happen, and things will start to break in the house. Madness.
Like controlled madness. Is that the idea?
Yes. Yeah. I've been toying with the idea of doing one of those episodes or shows again. There was a duo called Syphil and Ollie who were worth checking out. They were like an early 2000s duo of just sock puppet guys who are insane. And I was like, oh yeah, we should try those again and see where they take us.
But you said your dog ended up being kind of like him. Your dog's been watching the films and he just kind of adopted that personality.
It's totally possible. He was watching and was like, that's who I want to be. Like, just to like puppet geek out for a second. Most of the characters in that film don't have expressive faces. They're just fixed expressions. So you have to move them in certain ways or get certain lighting. But a sock puppet, you can do anything you want to for your expression with your hand, which makes it literally a much softer character, more inviting character than the others.
And you've taught some puppeteering classes at Meow Wolf and through a few other organizations. So we kind of started off this conversation by talking about how the fringe elements of it, but you're teaching classes in it.
Yes, New Mexico School for the Arts and Monte del Sol and wherever else. When I was doing residencies, we would do little online classes. So I did like an online shadow puppet and film class, which was really, really fun. One of the great things about teaching puppets or puppetry is there's not a lot of rules. So there's not a lot of, you have to do this and then this and then this. It's more like finding a creative template so that people kind of get out of their own way and go wild more, if that makes any sense. The other thing about those classes is how much interest there is. People come out of the woodwork and they love these classes, especially the making. People really want to know how to make them, makes these creatures that work. It's like this huge, who knew? There's this huge reservoir of interest and curiosity around puppets and puppetry.
Which is also kind of an interesting thing where it's this very free, do what you want to do thing. But with a class, there's kind of implied rules to a certain extent, maybe the foundation of how do you get there, and then you go wild. Is that?
Yeah, you're kind of hitting on the struggle I always have is when I'm doing this with other people, is that for me, I always want to make it seem like it's an anarchic, rule-free environment, but it really is a lot more like playing an instrument or building an instrument. There really is a lot of sort of just some certain foundational systems that you should have a good handle on. And so while I'm always pro anarchy and wildness and let your freak flag fly and make your crazy thing, go for it, it is really helpful to have some guiding principles going in. That is something I have learned for sure.
Kind of like if you're going to apply for a grant or a residency or something like that, you want to go in doing what you're doing. But I was going to dot my T's and cross my I's. So, maybe that's not great depending on the organization you're applying
That's what
to.
we're all going to be doing in 2022 and 2023.
Or maybe that's what gets you in.
Yes, exactly.
I feel like this person, this is definitely the person.
It's a funny form because it's good to have your technique before you go wild, but I've also seen it happen so many times that having a puppet in somebody's hands, especially a sock, allows people to become like truly unhinged, which I love. And the more of that, the better.
Punk rock, are you a fan of the music? And do you have any favorite bands?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I was like a 90s punk kid all the way. A lot of mosh pits, a lot of late night shows, and a lot of wildness. So favorite punk bands would be like, oh my God, like how long have you got? One band that's super inspired though, and this one, people who are deep in there will really get it. The band Suicide, Alan Vega. Alan Vega he's a template for Stan. Like Alan Vega plus like some Bruce Springsteen, a little Rambo thrown in there. Like that's sort of him, including the red bandana, the whole thing. For our episodes, there's like not a lot of punk music per se. But, when people think of it, it's like slamming drums and a few guitars and screaming. There's only like one of those songs. Most of it's like synth music or 80s inspired John Carpenter kind of music. But the aesthetic and the idea and the energy is all inspired by that stuff. Anarchy and like just absolutely being true to yourself in whatever form. A lot of inspiration from there. Another big inspiration for a lot of this is a show from 80s English show called The Young Ones, which is like sort of, there's a very tiny selection of what you might call like punk TV shows. But that was absolutely one from England. The rats that appear in the movie, the 4 little like finger puppet mice, are based on the 4 characters from The Young Ones. So that kind of stuff was always there with us. The battle between Stan and the sort of Nosferatu monster with the iPhone in his head, it's like your punk versus disco battle straight up.
I love all of those references. I gotta say, Space Ladies music, pretty amazing.
One of the original ideas was to have like to have it be a 30-minute episode show. It's changed now, but that was one of the original ideas. And we'd have like a musical guest on each show. And so we managed to get Space Lady. My partner saw her, doing a street performance, and then we performed with her at Meow Wolf. We just approached her. It turns out when you're like, hey, would you like to be in a punk puppet musical and we'll make a puppet of you? Nobody says no to that. They were like, so she was so excited and said yes. And let us use her song. And we made Sabrina Griffith made the puppet of her. Flying Wall Studios. She's an amazing puppet maker. She's awesome. I
don't know why anybody would want to make a puppet of me, but if they did, it's like, how do you say no to that? That's kind of a huge compliment. So I'm not surprised she was all in.
Yeah, and the rest of the music is like I say, synth inspired, kind of John Carpenter, originally riffing off of like low primitive synth stuff from like early 80s slasher and zombie films, which are another big inspiration. Grindhouse films and gore films are part of the DNA here. So that's what that was the kind of music I wanted to use as much as possible. Also very easy to do that alone. With your little like music program, just push a few synth buttons, boom, and you're ready to go.
You don't need a full-on band for that.
For one song, local amazing performer Jessie Deluxe, her group at the time, they gave a song for episode 2, Lydia's songs. Always having other collaborators and musical people appear in the shows is like makes it so much richer and so much more fun.
So one thing I'm always curious about is what creative people collect. In your case, I'm curious specifically maybe what might get collected in terms of puppet. Stan stays around because he's going to be in other films, but in terms of sets, and do you collect items from that or as part of it, thinking you'll use it in the future?
Yes and no. The yes part is that we have saved a lot of the sets in case we do shoot more episodes, sort of just like standard kind of film universe practice. Also, you want to keep them around in case a shot you didn't work out in the end. You want to be able to reshoot it if you can, or donate them, like give them to other people because they're kind of amazing. We had a really innovative, wild team building this stuff for us, or with us. So I'm like, loath to give it away or lose it. At the same time, the whole idea and part of it is impermanence and not being attached to anything. So tossing stuff aside is as important as keeping it. That's not easy to do, but it's part of the whole idea. So even though I may like naturally want to hold on to these things, letting them go and tossing them out, thing comes in, you say yes, thing goes away, you say yes.
And maybe on to somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. See where they take it.
Is there anything else that you collect?
I have been a nomad so many times in my life. I've actually just learned how to like live with one pair of socks and like one shirt and a backpack and be in the universe. I don't collect anything. My partner collects amazing. Behind me, you can see like these Mexican masks. One of my first puppet teachers was always a little nervous around the kind of esoteric aspects of having masks or puppets on walls. He always thought it kind of robbed them of their power. So I try not to do anything I'm going to work with. It's not usually on display. So that's the other reason I try not to collect things, is because I want them to keep their potency in as much as possible. A lot of creative people have that as part of their lives. I've just moved around so much. Part of my MO is letting things go all the time. So I've sort of ended up on the opposite side of that spectrum, but that instinct is still there.
Right. If you want to pick up and go to Brazil for the summer, you're not hauling 87 pounds of books and or records.
Even though I may want to have that 87 pounds of books and records.
So being from Santa Fe, Chile, New Mexico, Chile has to be part of your life. You have a preference between red and green?
Yeah, I like red chili in Santa Fe and I like green chili in Albuquerque.
Oh, interesting. Is it the slight change in elevation or just the different restaurants?
The terroir. No, it could be the elevation or the change, but yeah, it's a vital part of life for all of us.
If you haven't been to New Mexico, you got to come try our chili here.
Oh yeah. Learn to live again.
It's an addiction. So you have any shout outs, plugs, anything we haven't talked about that you want to bring up?
Let's see. God, there's so many people. There's like an endless number of amazing people I worked with. And so if I start plugging people, I'm just going to feel guilty that I'm missing others who aren't, I'm not plugging. But everybody who's worked with us as an amazing artist is still making great, wonderful work. And so gratitude there. I don't know, there's some interesting stuff coming up. We'll see what unfolds in this next year. I just shot a video for a ska band in Connecticut. That should be coming out in soon-ish, but I think that's it. I'm doing a little re-edit of the 3-episode film, so it flows better. It's less like choppy because that was just squished together. A lot of people want to see more Stan stuff, so I should probably deliver. But that's it. Just a big thank you for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate it. And if you have future films or anything coming up, please let me know about that. I'd love to share that on Instagram. Always trying to kind of promote things happening in Santa Fe and other places. So keep me posted, and thanks for talking, and nice to meet you, and have a great night.
My pleasure, and thank you.
Thanks for watching Art in the Raw, Conversations with Creative People. I hope you enjoyed meeting Devon and you're feeling inspired. If so, consider subscribing to the channel and telling like-minded friends. If you liked the video, like it. If you have something to say, please comment. And check out the new website, artintheraw.net.